I want to bring in Republican Texas Congressman Pete Sessions, who has plans to visit the border with the House Speaker right after the first of the year. So, Congressman, welcome, first of all. Happy New Year. But the House Speaker is going to call for President Biden to take executive action. What kind of action do you think the president needs to take?
Well, the action that needs to be taken is to follow the law. This is when you get away from rule of law, you go into chaos. And this is where this country is headed. The President of the United States is very open about not following legal precedent nor the law. So what I believe we do need to do is to get it to the Supreme Court. I believe the Supreme Court can effectively rule on the law. The laws of this country, notwithstanding presidential directives, are that there are extensive laws that talk, including about staying in place in Mexico, remaining in Mexico, and following an orderly process. The laws are there to avoid exactly what is happening today, and that is where not just rule of law, but the lives of this country and national security is at risk.
Right. So I want to get your take on this. Mexico seemed to be in the driver's seat in a meeting with the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and the Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas. Mexico announced that it was the closed train crossings would open again, and that the fentanyl issue did not really come up in those meetings. And the 8,000-strong caravan is still coming. So what did the U.S. get?
Well, the U.S. gets open borders by the Democratic Party. They get, by what is occurring here today, chaos all across America, in our cities, in our streets, in our housing facilities, in our schools. This is an unparalleled breaking down of the law, of not just rule of law, but actually of democracy. Democracy is breaking down right in front of our eyes because of the Democratic Party.
Well, so in the joint statement out of that meeting, both sides discussed, say they, quote, discussed the benefits of regularizing the situation of long-term undocumented Hispanic migrants and DACA recipients who are a vital part of the U.S. economy and society. This could be a nod to making people who cross the border illegally automatic citizens, skipping the line. What do you think about that?
Well, we have thought about it. We've thought about it for 3 years now. The President of the United States began this as soon as he took his oath of office to defend not only this country, but to make sure that he well and faithfully executed the laws of this country. He went straight to the White House and ordered this, among other things. So this is...
But do you think they're looking at amnesty? Do you think they're looking at amnesty, Congressman?
Well, of course they are. They want to overrun this country. That is what this is about. It's really to attack capitalism, rule of law, and democracy. And this is what they choose to do, and this is what they want to do.
Congressman, you're on the House Financial Services Committee as well, and I want to squeeze in a question about a possible government shutdown. Now, we talked with Representative Corey Mills this week, who says that a shutdown the border or shut down the government. Where do you stand on that issue?
Well, I think that is where we are. That is where we were told at the time we elected new Republican leadership that there would be a complete agreement that the border would be included in any deal. And that is language that would be necessary about remaining in Mexico and following the law. And the Speaker chose not to do that.
So when House members get back to D.C., they'll have less than 2 weeks to avert a government shutdown. Then how likely do you think the government is to shut down?
Well, we have now taken care of our United States military, which was the right thing to do. But our next effort should be to secure federal law enforcement. But this is about the whole ball of wax here. And the Texans, I'm sure to a person, will not vote to extend funding the government unless we resolve the matter related to the Texas border. And I am on record, and the Speaker knows this, and we must not allow this to continue. We've got to, because of national security, we've got to change.
I want to squeeze one more in here for you. I want to change hemispheres. Last night, Russia launched its largest aerial assault, we're just learning, on Ukraine since the war began, using drones and missiles, some of those missiles hypersonic in capabilities. In a statement, the president says we cannot let our allies and partners down. We cannot let Ukraine down, and history will judge harshly those who fail to answer freedom's call. I want you to get your reaction to all of that.
Well, in fact, you're speaking to a member that does support us funding Ukraine and taking care of this Russian problem. If not, Russia will overrun the rest of Europe. We must not allow this to happen. So last night was the biggest barrage that they've had since the war started on Ukraine. And the Ukrainians, while they shot down many of the drones and the missiles, there was extensive damage across Ukraine, and I'm sure it's in direct relationship to the Ukrainians attacking the port city and the ship that the Russians had. So this is a long-term effort here, and the United States has to be on the side of making sure we do not let Russia overrun the rest of Europe.
Representative Pete Sessions, I appreciate your help this ending this 2023. Thank you very much, and have a great new year.